So here we have this asynchronous code that uses the callback approach. In this lecture, I'm going to show you how to rewrite this using promises. So I'm going to put this side by side so you can see the difference. We call getUser, give it 1 as an argument. Now this getUser returns a promise. So we can get the promise here. Now in the last lecture, you learned that every promise object has two methods: catch and then. We use catch to catch errors and then to get the result of an asynchronous operation. So we can call then. At this point, what is the result of this asynchronous operation? The result is a user object, because here in this function, getUser, we are resolving this promise with this object, with this user object, right? So here we pass a function that takes a user. Now we can do something with this user. We can simply display it in the console, right? Let's run the application up to this point and make sure everything works. So I'm going to temporarily comment out this code here. Back in the terminal, let's run node index.js. So 2 seconds after, we read a user from database, and here's our user object. Beautiful. Now we can simplify this code. We can get rid of this constant and chain then to what we get from getUser function. So we delete this and chain then right here. So getUser, then here we have a user object and we can display it on the console. Now in our previous implementation, once we got a user, then we got the repositories for that user. So let's modify this. Instead of calling console.log, we're going to call getRepositories. And as an argument, we pass user.github username. Now, this function that we pass to this then method, if this function returns a value, then we'll wrap that value inside a promise. That means if we return a value here we're going to have another promise. So we can call then on that promise. In this case, that promise is the promise that is returned from the getRepositories function. Let's have a look here. So getRepositories returns a promise, and eventually it will resolve that promise with this array of repositories. So here we're chaining then on the second promise. When this promise is resolved, we're going to have our array of repositories. Now at this point, we want to get the commits for the first repository. So we call get commits. As an argument, we pass the first repository. Now once again, this function get commits also returns a promise. So we can chain then on that promise. That promise, when resolved, will eventually have the list of commits for the given repository. So here we pass a function, commits goes to, and here we can simply display those commits on the console. So commits. Now let's run this program one more time. So node index.js. We have before and after. 2 seconds later, we read the user from database. 2 seconds later, we call GitHub API and call it again to get the list of commits. And here is the array of commits. Beautiful. Now, look at these two different implementations. Let me remove this comment. In the first implementation, we used callbacks, and that's why we ended up with this nested structure, the callback hell problem. In the second implementation, we used promises, and we got this flat structure. So this is the beauty of using promises. Because promises expose the then method, we can chain them to implement a complex asynchronous operation. But wait a second, we're not done yet. We can take this to the next level. Later in this section, I'm going to show you how to make this code even simpler. Now finally, before we finish this lecture, as a best practice, whenever we are working with promises, we should make sure to catch any errors. So finally, at the end here, I call catch, get an error, and for now, just display that error on the console. So error, we display error.message. Now with this implementation, if an error occurs during any of these asynchronous operations, this function will be called. So we have a single error handler to handle the errors that come from any of these asynchronous operations.